I'm still continuing in Colossians. This is the final chapter, and I'm going to pick up a little bit off last time, and I'm actually using two versions today. Normally I speak from the King James, which I have, but I think sometimes here, this is the New International Version, maybe gives slightly clearer understanding. Now, I want to go back into chapter 3, because there it's, in the last part of chapter 3, it's saying, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. And I can tell you I was brought up on that. If I was rebellious, I was reminded of Scripture. But on one occasion, the funny thing is I actually had to rebuke my mother, because I said, it also says, fathers, provoke not your children to anger. I don't know what the argument was over. It's a long time ago. But she did respond and did shut up. But the reason I'm picking up from this is because it's in verse 22, where it says, servants, obey in all things your masters. Now, the reason I'm taking the comparison with the New International Version, because in the New International Version, it doesn't say servants, it actually says slaves. Now, that's particularly applicable, as we shall see as we go on. But what it's saying is, servants, obey your masters according to the flesh. And it's actually speaking to people, employed people, if you want, who are in secular jobs. But it says it in an interesting way. It says, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. Now, I'm going to be quite strong on this, because what it's really saying, that even in the secular world, we have to serve a secular master as if it were the Lord. And it says very clearly in verse 24, the Lord will reward us for faithfulness in the job we do. And one reason I'm mentioning this is because many years ago, as you know, in order to do the Bible smuggling, I had a travel company which came out of my first journey to Jerusalem in 1961. It developed into a travel company, and I had staff. And where I could, I employed Christians. For two reasons. One is because I thought, well, surely they'll be better employees. And also because, yes, I was offering work, jobs, and I had drivers, I had mechanics in the garage side of the business, which we had to do for servicing our buses. But the strange thing is, and to me, I find this tragic. Obviously, I couldn't only employ Christians because there weren't always Christians with the right skills. In fact, I had difficulty in recruiting Christian bus drivers, for example. And so occasionally I had to take them out of the commercial world, out of the secular world. But my sad reflection, and I'm going back 50 years, 60 years, my sad reflection is that my non-Christian employees were often better than the Christian. Now, not just in terms of the work that they did, but their attitude. I actually had some of my Christian employees, and I remember one of them saying to me, I'm not listening to you, I'm not doing what you say, because I serve God, not you. Well, that's an absolute contradiction of the scripture. And I don't hear preachers talking about these things, but of course, because of my age, I can say it. It was sad that so often I found out that the non-Christian could be more reliable. And that's why Paul senses this. He must have known, he must have seen it, because we're dealing here with the early days of the church. We're dealing with the early Christians, and it has to be an instruction right from the beginning. Servants, obey your masters in all things according to the flesh. This isn't spiritual. Not with eye service or lip service, as we say, as men pleasers, simply to please the people, but fearing God, doing it. And it's quite clear, whatever you do, verse 23, whatever you do, do it as if it was to the Lord. Because even in secular work, you are serving the Lord. And you know, the truth is that this should be a witness, that Christians in business should be better employees than the secular. You should set an example, an illustration that because you're a Christian, you do your job better, you're more honest, you're more straightforward. Paul is very clear in this, and that's why I'm emphasizing it. And in verse 24, it's because you know that the reward we receive in the kingdom is through loyalty and faithfulness in everything, not just spiritual issues. Too often, I'm finding that people tend to spiritualize this to the extent, oh, it's only because I'm serving Jesus. No, it says slightly differently. And it also, of course, ends up in verse 25, and you can't ignore verse 25, because it says, he that does wrong shall receive for that wrong that he's done. And in other words, every one of us must appear before the judgment seat of Christ. I think there are 7 judgments. But the scripture is clear. Every one of us must appear before Christ in order that we receive judgment and reward. I mean, it isn't just punishment, but the scripture is quite clear on reward, that some Christians, because of lack of faithfulness and so on, are saved as by fire. The scripture goes on to say that what we're doing down here gets up to heaven, and some of us are building a house, a real house, and some with straw, with hay, with stubble, as the scripture says. In other words, you're building a very, very temporary structure, and then it says, and some saved us by fire. So the whole of eternity depends on our attitude here. I don't find that this is strongly mentioned in preaching, and of course at my age I can tell you these things. I'm not afraid of anybody at my age. That's the blessing of being my age and being in my position. I'm not worried about a church. I don't pastor a church anymore, but I can speak to you strongly from Scripture. And the Scripture is absolutely clear that down here we live 70 years or a little bit more, as in my case, and what we do down here, whether it's in the secular or the spiritual, builds a reward in the kingdom.